microphone working?
Yes.
Ah, very good. Well, as I look around the audience, I realize that most of you probably have a personal story about disruption that has already happened or is anticipated. I wish I could take each one of you home and get to know you a little bit better. Because your stories are important to us. You know, the idea of disruption, it's a really powerful word. Like we get the eruption of the volcano, only one way. Disruption, this means spread everywhere. And rupture is another interesting root word for that. We're talking about really serious stuff. And that's probably my main take on, get my thing to work here, on the role of the university is coping with those disruptions in ways that go beyond the roles that they think they're doing so far. The university is interesting because, first of all, it's beauty, it's one. It's not a bunch of departments, it's a community of a single conversation with many, many edges to it. And that's really important to remember. I think the idea that the university is a community coming out of the monastic movement and other things is really part of what we have to think about the future and not assume that the future is kind of an extension of the present. The university is in between the government and the corporations. It's a really interesting place to be. Most people in the university, when they talk about its role, they talk about it in relation to the government in terms of regulation and the corporations in terms of skills to get jobs. Probably not an adequate picture. The disruption is so deep in the roles that people are going to have to play. And one of them, I think, is to take on the dialogue between the university and the governments and the university and the corporations. Most conversations leave the corporations off the hook. Like, how could they possibly be responsible for global warming? That's a humanity did that. I think if you read the history, you're going to find out that isn't true. A few people in humanity did it, and a lot of people resisted for a long time. Just as an anecdote, hunter-gatherers spent 100,000 years resisting getting put into compounds. And the compounds that were finally built were not to keep marauders out, but to keep slaves in. Nobody wanted to go there. These are really interesting things that I think can help inform our current view of our own situation now. Sometimes the iPad doesn't work. Right?
Disruption.
I want to give an example of the difference between unitary thinking and the way people are taught now. I was at a conference a few weeks ago with a young economist, PhD economist, presenting his dissertation to a group about this size. And what he was talking about was the impact of tax on who used and who did not use electricity. And it was filled with differential equations, fancy tables, fine print that was hard to read. You know the story. The reality of the human lives that were being touched by the changes in the tax policy, he had never even thought about it. I talked to him afterwards. It just wasn't part of his thinking or part of the teaching. I think we have to do much better than that and get people to see that when they learn how to do something in academia, they understand the secondary consequences and the impact on society. Now, to me, this isn't a terrible task. It makes the task really much more interesting. And I think one of the things that this university will try to do is to make the knowledge really attractive to young people. So it isn't, oh my God, another problem set. But really, if you would like, get home and read that. And there's some fantastic things being written, by the way, which changes the landscape a little bit. There are more. I'll give you one example. A book by Swede Andreas Malm, M-A-L-M, called Fossil Capital. And basically it's about the British discovery of the value of the stuff on the ground. And it wasn't to meet a market need, it was to control the workers. That's why they shifted to coal. Totally different story. We need to know these kinds of stories. And there are a lot of them. One of the things that people get told, cudgeled into believing, is that as their job goes away, there are going to be new jobs. Everybody remembers the buggy whip and the horse, right? It always happens. When farming went down, industry went up. It all worked out. Well, of course, it disrupted lives totally, led to huge suicides and bankruptcies and all that. But basically, there were jobs there. The difference now is this. In traditional societies, I have to tell you where I'm going. Give me 1 minute. In traditional societies, elites needed workers to do agriculture. I think he sort of agrees with me that it's much worse. Much worse. In response to climate change, which means, for example, using a lot less energy, probably 80% of the jobs in society now will have to change. They'll have to be reprogrammed, re-experienced. It's going to mean people moving from where they are to a different place. The costs of all that are extraordinary. It's really rough. So the idea that jobs will be there, well, that's interesting because it means we're going to have a lot of talent without jobs. People who know history knows what that could lead to. But, come on. Oh, I'll make it up. Some examples of bad teaching, bad thinking that's taught in the current university. One is that we have to grow the economy in order to create jobs for all these people who need jobs. The obvious thing is that creating jobs requires using energy. The jobs will use energy, getting to the jobs will use energy. The net is bad because increasing jobs, growing the economy, under current conditions, that's a bit of a qualification, makes the climate problem worse. And the climate problem is really bad. Why can't we, people like us, and I'm sure some of you are doing this, understand that dealing with the two problems at the same time is harder, but also might be adequate. There's no point in doing something, creating more jobs if this is going to help the society collapse. So that's an example. And you at conference after conference, you hear people, the politicians do it all the time, the bankers do it all the time, the economists do it all the time. If we can just grow, let's get rid of the barriers to growth, everything will be back to the way it was in the, pick your decade. That's in there somewhere. There we go, hey. Yeah, another thing about climate and jobs is that in the current scheme of things, creating jobs that are going green feeds into a business regime that siphons money uphill to the rich. So long as we keep doing that, going green is going to fail because it's too cynical and it leads people to make the wrong decisions about technology because they make the ones that are going to pay off for them. These are just examples of things where, when you think of it, how people's mind can go down some of these tracks without recognizing the side effects of what they're talking about. We've got to just do a lot better, and I'm going to really work with Andrew to help make this university do that. I think one of the things about the students is any one of them could be in this room, understand exactly what we're saying. We don't have to do that education. The education we have to do is, okay, given the despair and the difficulties, how do you think and how do you get towards what to do? And by the way, nobody knows. I'm going to give another example of difficult thinking. As you all came here, I'm sure you noticed, not for the first time, there's too much traffic. Are we so dumb we can't do anything about that? I mean, come on, guys. So I thought of the following. This is going to be a challenge. We take all the cars that are electric and give them to the government. And they run around as Uber-type cars, picking up anybody that calls in. So anybody who had a car isn't losing anything because the Uber is going to be probably faster than their own car was. Why not go there? The problem of all the rest of the cars, some undergraduate is going to write a wonderful paper on what to do with those cars, but we don't need them anymore. The traffic is thinned out. The energy profile changes incredibly. I'm not saying it's the right answer, but I'm saying it's look, we need 100 possibilities like that, 95 of which are going to be wrong. But we have things that we need to explore those. I think of education as getting students to think on multiple tracks simultaneously. This could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Let's explore the differences by playing them against each other. That would be really good education, and I think the students would like it. I think it would be a little hard on some of the professors, but, you know, somebody's got to suffer.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, my story is a little different, not entirely different. So in trying to shape a meaningful role for universities in a disruptive digital age, let me start with the obvious. Like Doug already indicated, the world is facing enormous challenges, and all available human creative and constructive power should be mobilized to meet those challenges. And the key questions to be asked, the key question to be answered is how to do this. In trying to find an answer to this question, we will have to deal with universities and with the two key positions that modern universities hold in the world. They are the bastions of education and they are bastions of science. And because of these positions, universities have a heavy stake in the answer. But suppose there were no universities, and suppose that all the knowledge that mankind has ever collected and generated is accessible somehow. Would we invent universities to make this knowledge available, to address the problems humanity faces? And if so, what functions would have to be performed by those universities? And what role would science play in those universities? To find answer to those questions, let us take stock of the key ingredients that must go into the answer. Oh, they're already there. The nature of the problem, the knowledge needed to address those problems, the gap between the two, the need for interdisciplinarity, and the need to educate the leaders of the future, and of course the boundaries of scientific knowledge. And we start with the nature of the problem. Oh, you're way too far. Back. Nature of the problem, yes. Warren Weaver in 1948 looked at the development of science by defining the problems it could solve. He distinguished three types of science. Science that can solve simplistic problems, science that can solve problems of disorganized complexity, and science that can solve problems of organized complexity. The science that deals with the problems of organized complexity is largely equivalent to complexity science, and that is the science that essentially deals with the complexity of the world. The grand challenges of the world all fall in the class of complex problems, and their very nature defies the reductionist or disciplinary approach. Here is a simple schematic. There it is. Representation of a typical complex adaptive system. In such a system, there are interacting agents like universities, companies, students, or teachers, who in their interaction create new problems and new phenomena, like new knowledge or technology, which in turn affects the interactions between the agents, for instance by changing the environmental challenges to which the agents are exposed, which in turn leads to new challenges to the agents, new needs to knowledge and technology, etc. The interaction change, the agents change, the emergent phenomena change, The cycle is endless, the change continues and unpredictable. That is the type of systems that we have to deal with when asking the questions whether we can prepare the next generation for the uncertain future of work, or for that matter, when we face any problem that evolves the dynamics of today. The next point is the knowledge needed to address those problems. It's all part of the biggest idea of the problem. If we cast our net wide enough, mankind may have all the knowledge it needs. There's an enormous body of knowledge embedded in the books of ancient philosophers that in very similar ways deals with the complexity of day-to-day life. If that knowledge had been put into practice in the last few hundred years, many of the complex problems and excesses to which the world has fallen victim would have been avoided. For example, if people would have pursued happiness in Epicurean terms, the plague of diabetics too would not exist. Nor would consumerism have polluted the world, or would carbon dioxide have contributed to the climate change, or would the invention of plastics have resulted in an existential threat to humanity. Whether scientific knowledge might have played a part in that is not as clear as it may seem, partly because it is not organized to address non-scientific problems, partly because it is organized along disciplinary lines, and partly because the jargon it uses, scientific knowledge, is highly inaccessible for non-disciplinary experts. So how to identify the knowledge needed to address a problem? I think the first step is to take the problem as the lead, because the problem will give the clues what kind of knowledge is required to develop effective interventions. Okay. The gap between the available and required knowledge, given the problem and the available knowledge, the key issues then become to bring that knowledge to bear on that problem, to identify gaps in the knowledge, and to develop a strategy to filling those gaps. There are no established methods to accomplish this. However, we can make a few suggestions that may help to find and develop such methods. Yeah. First is the complexity lens. It's a kind of an abstract concept, but at present there is no such tool, no tool for decision makers to determine whether a problem is complex, and if so, what level of complexity it has. The complexity lens could be such a tool, and having such a tool would have many advantages. To craft such a lens, we need the knowledge, skills, and expertise in all the scientific disciplines, as well as the conceptualizing power of philosophers and the creative imagination of artists. The Wawasan Open University could play a role to do this. And then there's the urgency of time frames. There's an increasing urgency to effectively address the problems that mankind is facing today. Problems that is diverse as rapid urbanization, the impact of technology, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, or the loss of biodiversity, just to name a few. No time and money can be wasted anymore by allowing individual scientists to dally with those problems in countless small-scale projects in university laboratories around the world. Instead, we need to mobilize the bright minds of our world to collectively focus on those problems. And that this can be done has been demonstrated, among others, in the Manhattan Project. One back, please. The Manhattan Project is an extreme example of what can be achieved if creativity is channeled by determination. I believe that the threats humanity is facing at this moment are not less severe than the threats the world faced in World War II. Yet the time frame in which the existing research infrastructures operate are not determined by global urgency, but by the need to sustain that infrastructure. I therefore suggest that to counter those threats, we start Manhattan-like projects outside the existing research infrastructures, in which the creativity and knowledge of the best minds in the world are channeled towards ensuring sustainable life on Earth. And finally, the alternative suggestions to close the gap between knowledge and the problem, is the power embedded in cultural differences. Differences are the catalysts for creativity, and they embody the forces of change. Cultures embody the knowledge and wisdom of doing things. Different cultures provide different perspectives of doing things. In order to unleash the creative power that is embedded in the differences between culture, different cultures need to communicate to address the big problems the world faces. Also here, because of the varied cultural backgrounds in Malaysia and in Penang, I think the Wawasan Open University would play a big part in it. And then we go back to the key ingredients of the problems that we need to address. And there's a need for interdisciplinarity. The way science has organized itself in disciplines has nothing to do with the big problems I've been alluding to. So it seems clear that these problems cannot be addressed in an effective way by disciplinary science. It is my conviction that in order to meet the big challenge of humanity, there is an urgent need for interdisciplinarity. It is also my conviction that such interdisciplinarity can best be developed in small new institutes or in universities like Wawasan Open University that are independent of traditional disciplinary infrastructures of science. And finally, educating the leaders of the future. I started my talk by asking if we assume that all the knowledge of mankind has ever collected is accessible somehow, would we design universities to make this knowledge available? From my talk so far, you may conclude that we do not need universities, at least not the type of universities that do research as their basic, not the type of research universities that at present dominate the academic landscape. But we do need places to educate the leaders of the future and to prepare young people to shape a better future for mankind. And I will call those places universities. Of course, there's not one type of leader, nor is the future in any way known or predictable. But it seems to me that there's a number of characteristics that will come in handy, whatever the future brings us. I have listed those characteristics here. You can read them yourself. If these points are integrated with principles like problem-based learning, I believe that the educational system in general, and the university like the WOU in particular, can become a moral high ground for society where leaders for the future will be educated. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to try to summarize all this until later, but let's listen, last but not least, human factors.
Thank you. I'm Ms. Mayan, and chairman of the board of the university. I'm members of the board. It's very difficult following speakers like those. So I'm going to keep my feet firmly on the ground, introduce myself as a lifelong clinical teacher. That's what I've been. I worked for the British NHS in my entire career, having grown up in Hong Kong, and then went to London to train. And then because of the sheer competition and difficult climbing up the ladder in London, I went up to Birmingham. And in fact, it started a trend of me moving around. It's very unusual. The stage 4, even now, is a consultant, our jobs for life. Don't move. And I broke the mold. And in fact, my last move broke the mold even more. I'll go there first. I applied for the last job at the same time as my trainee was applying for the same job. And when I rang up, the head of the department couldn't take it. He said, Dr. Xu, are you ringing up on behalf of your fellow? I said, no, I'm ringing up on behalf of myself. I had to compete equally. I got the job. I was possibly equally qualified on paper, more senior in age, And I even said that I'm moving back partly because my family is in London. I was quite honest. But in fact, the department wanted me because they wanted somebody to help them change. I think by then, I had developed a reputation of a change maker. I changed things which I did not set out intending to change. Circumstances made it that I had to fight. And earlier, in our discussion in the morning, I said that I was a bit, at times felt like David against Goliath, which is in a way a very good parallel of what this university is facing in the setting of other institutions in this country and in the world. The old establishment tend to sit still, sit on the glory, draw the glory, and not adapt. I think the biggest, if you like, advantage of this institution, it is relatively young. It is not set in its way yet, and it is prepared to change. And I would like to think that this board set up by Andrew Sheng is there to, one, have a forum for new, open way of thinking, and indirectly, I dare say, indirectly influence the way the university will operate. I have one or two points to say about my career in order to justify what I claim. I started the university department where the professor was really old-fashioned, believed in the old way of thinking, and when I went in, he said, "Oh, by the way, Dr. Shu, whatever you write, my name must be on the paper." And at that time, there was a norm, and I just absolutely would not accept it. And it probably wrecked my subsequent career, but I wasn't going to accept it. And in fact, a few years later, the medical journals realized that that old way is absolutely wrong. The authors in the paper should be in the order of responsibility, and also any name on that paper should be singularly and collectively responsible. It's almost like board members, non-executive board members used to think that they could just sit around and not take any notice. Now they are highly responsible. And medical papers now work like that. And I was the first to argue, and the university and the head of the department thought that I was really, a maverick. Well, I was called a maverick many times after that, because I then started to appreciate that we were treating heart attacks in what we call benign negligence. Patient have a heart attack, put them to bed. In fact, some of them develop DVT because they spend so much time in bed. And now, the typical heart attack patients go home on day 3. Right? Now, of course, many processes have gone through. And I started looking into this so-called angioplasty. And it was so new that the established departments, the professors, particularly the bigger the department, the less receptive to the idea that physicians, cardiologists, should stick balloons inside the coronary arteries. When the first one was done by the inventor Andre Grunzig from Switzerland, he had a team of surgeons and anesthetists around him because they fully expected that as he put this balloon into the blocked artery, the patient would have a cardiac arrest on the spot because we were deprived of that part of oxygen, and the patient would have to be rushed to theatre. It didn't happen. But there were other problems. They were primitive. The instrument was primitive. The very idea of just blowing up a balloon inside the artery took many years to settle down. And the program was almost shut down. And I somehow knew that this is the way to go. I don't know why, but anyway. And the whole hospital department was against it. The Cardiac Society was against it. A few practitioners down in London started it. I wanted to start it in Birmingham. They didn't want to guide me in any way. So a few of us formed almost like a self-help group to exchange ideas. And we found that the best way to learn is through our own mistakes. Because if you have collect about 20 people to talk regularly and find that they make mistakes, I make mistakes, but if you share your mistakes, you learn faster. And it was against that time the Cardiff Society way of doing things. But I set up a new society called Interventionist Society because we call it Interventionist Society because we go into the archery and work. And at first there was great resistance, but in time it worked, the model worked so well of helping one another and working with industry. Industry suddenly realized that instead of just kowtowing to the established cardiologists, here's a young group that actually they're willing to listen, they're willing to talk. And they showed this equipment which are very dodgy, said that this one doesn't work, this one may work better. Huh? So we established a completely different mode of society. We even accepted industrial members as members of our society. The main cardiac society thought that we were mad. But we weren't, and then within 4 years, they had to accept that we are so well established, we have to be the first society to be affiliated into. And I was the first president. So I saw this as really David conquering Goliath. And then I found that my institution was too laid back. Although I was starting all this, nobody, it's what we call a poet is never accepted at home. I think it seems to apply everywhere. So just because I did good, nobody in that university seemed to like what I was doing, which is inexplicable. I was burrowing into my sort of research department, writing a lot of papers with research fellows, and then I came up with this idea of an invention, and it wasn't a stand. In fact, it was most unusual. I was working with completely blocked artery. Again, it was against current thinking at that time. At that time, the idea is that this is such a new technique, you should only work with slightly narrowed arteries, but completely blocked arteries, too dangerous. I said, actually, completely blocked arteries probably is not that dangerous, it's already blocked. My job is to open it. And at that time, they say, oh, you should only work on patients with angina, which is recurrent pain. But acute heart attack, don't go there, don't even do an angiogram. I said, it's not rational. So that's why I got the name of being a maverick. But when I came up with this invention, the old way of working is that I was a university senior lecturer, and the university owned my invention, which was very difficult trying to go to industry with a patent which is owned by the university. And the first company that took it paid the university a large sum of money. I got 10% of it. Barely enough to cover my paperwork. And eventually, that first company said, it doesn't really work. Well, it just shows how difficult it is to invent something and take it to the market. Some people say invention is 1% invention, 1% innovation, 99% perspiration. I worked for a good 10 years with companies not in the UK, but in the Silicon Valley, where there was venture capitalists and really superb engineers and material engineers that produced something that worked exactly as I invented it. A device that would go inside coronary arteries during acute heart attacks to remove the clot. Even before the days of stenting. Following that, we can now remove the clot and put the stent in. Anyway, I'm not boasting, but that was that part of the journey. Another part of my journey is into management. And here I illustrate the so-called mindset and silo thinking. Traditionally, consultants don't take part in hospital management. There's something strange about hospital management which is really difficult. The police force manage their own affairs. right? You won't find managers managing police, right? But the health service, somehow the government says that doctors can't manage it. We're managers. So for many years, it was absolutely distinct. So I was complaining so much. My wife, who's, by the way, born not on the mainland, but she's Malaysia, but she's Malaysian, and she grew up in Kota Kinabalu. So she was Malaysian, and she definitely pushed me in almost every major decision that I was hesitating. She said, you complain so much about hospital management, now that you've got a bit of time, just go in, say that you do something for them. So I made the leap. And you know, the week that I actually got incorporated in clinical management, some of my best friends came up to me and said, I heard that you've gone to the dark side. So I spent the rest of the time showing them that I hadn't gone to the dark side, that I went to the dark side to learn the dark art in order to develop teams. And it really it started the journey of my understanding what teamwork is about, the causing barriers and motivating the whole team. And then I started reading about business theories of leadership, of how the mission statement should be spread not just to head of departments, but all the way down to the clinics. I even say at lunchtime, it came to me, I've said it before, that running a hospital is actually like running a hotel. You walk in a hotel, you know that this is well run within 5-10 minutes. You walk in a hospital, you will definitely know whether it's well run, especially the A&E department. So that is what I bring to the board, life experience and a rather sort of maverick view of the world, or fighting against the status quo, not always, but when I thought that the status quo is wrong.
Thank you, my friend.